at oops, I was looking at some of the big news over the last 5 years in women's soccer. In the United States, it's been the advent of the National Women's Soccer League. We have, there's investment pouring into these teams. We've had the U.S. women's team fighting for equal pay. That is a huge narrative in our country. And in Iran, we see all the mayhem and protests that are going in Iran, and Iranian women can't even get into soccer games in many, and they are technically legally allowed right now, but it doesn't happen in practice because they're turned away at the door, and that's literally not allowed in public places in certain events. I was trying to figure out a way to tie this into what we're specifically talking about with the upcoming World Cup. And if I'm not mistaken, the date I might be wrong about this, but I believe on November 29th, the U.S. men's national team plays Iran. And what am I thinking? What year was this? I had it written down. In the 2001, Iran had they I guess it was the 98. I'm sorry, not 2021. It was 98, and they beat Australia to get into the World Cup. And this was they were celebrating in the streets of Iran. And in this, a lot of women got into the celebration. And because it was just a massive celebration, there weren't, the women weren't punished and things like that. But when the team actually made it to the World Cup and were in the game, there was a group that was they were kind of the Iranians in exile that were actually at the game, and they were wearing shirts that showed the female leader of one of these exiled groups, and the TV stations wouldn't show it. And in Iran, 2 years later, all Iran had to do was beat Bahrain to advance to the next World Cup, and they ended up losing 3-0 among big rumors that the government pressured them not to win because they didn't want to be in this position again. And the reason I bring that up is because they actually did qualify in 2005. And one of the things that there was a big election that year, and the more liberal of the candidates had actually promised that if he would win, that women could watch the games and go to soccer games. He did not end up winning. The more conservative candidate won, and women were closed out. So I was just thinking of that as a way to tie in this. So, South Africa won the Women's Africa Cup of Nations this year. And I was saying, when we're looking at women's rights on the continent of Africa, obviously there are many different nations, so we've got a lot of different things to look at. But South Africa underwent great reforms in the 80s and 90s when it came to women's rights. And to see those reforms, the World Bank has a project, and it actually said that South Africa was one of the three most of the last 50 years when it came to reforms for women's rights. South Africa was in the top 3. And I actually just said that they won they were finalists in the Africa Cup of Nations this year. Morocco actually won, but South Africa has seen its team actually progressively get better since these reforms have come in, showing better in the Africa Cup of Nations, and we'll see how they do in the World Cup in Australia. Morocco, which that it was. Gained independence from France in the mid 1950s. Morocco has had they did win the Cup of Nations, spotty women's rights records, right? And this is the first year that they're going to be in the World Cup. We see a nation like Ireland making it for the first time. Ireland and Australia share the fact that they were both colonized by Great Britain. Here they come in, and Australia is going to be hosting for the first time a nation in the Southern Hemisphere will be hosting the Women's World Cup. So we're seeing how they have split apart, and my dad would hate me for even bringing this up, but the confines of Catholicism and what that has done in Ireland for how women play the game. It just hasn't been a priority there. So in conclusion, one of the things that I'm rapid fire shooting stuff up here, and I'm not nearly as organized as Dr. Yang was, but watching the arc of women's rights, and not exclusively, but largely and more than anecdotally, we see that arc follow the success of a team. Right now we're seeing some things happen in the United States where women are, the diversity of the team isn't as much racially as it is sexually and sexual orientation wise and gender expression wise. That is a conversation that sides in Africa could not even fathom having right now. In Nigeria, members of their national team, this is another chapter from my book, which I'm not even trying to sell. I don't get like royalties or anything from it. I just bring up, there's a chapter in there about the Nigerian women's national team where the members of the teams, the parents of many members of the team don't even tell their friends that their daughter is on the team because they don't want their daughter to be confused as a lesbian. One of the stars of the Nigerian team, Rashida Ajibade, she's known as the girl with the blue hair. She's a Nike athlete and she plays on Atletico de Madrid. Very androgynous young woman, but she also makes a point to showcase her Christian faith in her social media and things like this because it is a way to connect with fans. And I just think of that in contrast with some of the British stars and some of the American stars, and it's a night and day scenario. While women here in the Western nations have the luxury of fighting for equal pay, things like this, the majority of the rest of the players across the world are fighting for basic rights beyond the pitch, and that's what I have. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Dr. Yanity, for that amazing commentary. And before I post my, response or question to the both of you, I just wanted to invite all of the attendees to submit questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And we will be sure to, or try our best to pose those questions to either or both Doctors Yanity and Yang. So I have a response and question for each of you. So I'm wondering about, in this discussion of kind of empires, colonialism, post-colonialism, and football, with the World Cup coming up, is the very act of viewing the World Cup a political act, right? We think about a country like Qatar, right, which was in fact colonized by the UK, doesn't become independent until 1971. And so many people from formerly colonized parts of the world might have been particularly happy, right, that a former colony was allowed the kind of privilege and unique opportunity to host a World Cup. But as Dr. Yang has said, right, the preparation and planning and corruption involved that went into the decision to give the World Cup to Qatar is very controversial, right? We know that the number of migrant workers who died in the construction of some of these venues is over 1,000, right? And to Dr. Yanity's point, let's say that someone does want to tune in and watch the U.S. play Iran, right? Is that in any way a kind of tacit support for the horrible human rights record, right, occurring in Iran concerning the treatment of women, right? So that's just to say, a question I have for both of you is, as historians, as journalists, as fans of the beautiful game, right? Are we making a political statement by even turning our TVs or laptops or smartphones on and beaming in to watch these games? Dr. Yang, I'll let you go first, and then Dr. Yanity.
I think it's a very complex question, and one way to appreciate some aspects of the game is to differentiate between states and their governments and the players that really make this game so beautiful. And what is important about some of these players and making this kind of distinction is many of the players, and Molly's presentation pointed this out, become advocates for causes that run counter to the intentions and policies of the state. So World Cup or any major event, whether it's by kneeling or raising your fist or wearing some sort of armband, as let's say the British captain Harry Kane wants to wear an LGBTQ armband when he plays, and FIFA is trying to prevent him from doing so. These are also opportunities to present an alternative history, an alternative picture of the world. So yes, at some level, it's about celebrating nation states, but at another level, it's really about appreciating how well certain people play a certain game.
It's funny, Dr. Yang, it started that question, that was a complex question. And I see it a little bit differently. And man, I was like, man, that's a simple question. The answer is yes. But I mean, we're coming and looking at these from some different perspectives. I honestly think that when we have an event that is corporatized with the money poured into it, the way that the World Cup is, it is most definitely political, period. And that means, I mean, am I taking a political stand by watching? Yeah, I actually am. I am giving into that overwhelmed. Like, I mean, this is the definition of late stage capitalism. From where I said, yes, we are taking part in that when we turn on the TV, when we go to the games, when we're taking part in that. Now the thing is that many things right now are very polarized. Obviously, the day after election, she says, real smart. But the idea is that because everything is so polarized, particularly where we sit, and the idea of being involved in a political act, it isn't necessarily a willful act at the same time. Doing it, yes, I am taking stage in supporting this humongous capitalistic endeavor, but ultimately, as Dr. it's gorgeous. Watching athletes perform is entertaining and beautiful. It's not going to stop us as fans from doing that, but I think that we do have to understand that it is a political act, whether we mean it political in terms of I'm standing for something. We might not have our fist raised. We might not be kneeling. We might not be supporting a specific athlete and a specific stand they're taking. But by participating in this spectacle, we are absolutely doing politics.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. And before I go to Kyle's question in the Q&A chat box, Dr. Molly, I just wanted to follow up on something you said about kind of the kind of global reaction to the England-Cameroon match, and really how gendered that was, right? Because, turn on any men's soccer match and you're gonna see much worse behavior, right? You're gonna see people cursing in referees' faces, you know, and so there's a way, right? There is a kind of generally accepted way in which men are allowed to voice anger, frustration, and all of the natural emotions, right? That are kind of embedded in athletic competition at the very highest level with the highest stakes. But with women, right, there is a different set of expectations, right, which is unfair, biased, and then when you map race on top of that, you have what happens, right? I thought that that was an outstanding point that you gave. But I do see a question in the chat by Kyle. He says, I have a question for Anand, bearing in mind that he has personal background in two exceptionally large countries in which soccer is not an especially popular sport. Should we expect soccer to become more popular in Asia going forward? And if so, what factors might drive that popularity?
I think one of the points we're making over and over again is not only about the nexus between sports and politics, but sports and economies, right? And so the extent to which certain parts of the world excel in international sports partly has to do with the financing of it. And so India hasn't come along as much as China has in a lot of the sports. I think in team sports has been a little harder to develop, let's say, the Chinese football team, whereas countries like Japan and South Korea and North Korea have been very successful on both the men's side and the women's side, in part because the state has put its weight behind it. A different kind of story is the spread of football to India and the way Indians revel in the fact that in the 1910s, a team in Calcutta, an Indian team in Calcutta, playing in bare feet, defeated the European champion team. And so it's a moment, it's sort of a moment of subaltern triumph in a game that the British had ostensibly invented. So there's a sense of wanting to do better. I think it'll be a while because of the way sports is organized in that very large country, India. In India, the pull is also of cricket. And India, if you're a cricket fan, you probably know that it excels in it and has won the equivalent of the World Cup on numerous occasions. So they're also competing sports.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. And our next question is from William. And Molly, if you don't mind, I will direct this question to you first. The World Cup is coming to North America in 2026. And already there are community organizations in Mexico City organizing around Azteca Stadium redevelopment. And I expect there to be similar movements in cities like Vancouver, British Columbia, and Los Angeles. As not just fans, but as football supporters, is there a way to be both aware of the ramifications of large sporting events and be a part of the event? I would love to hear what you have to say, Dr. Yanity.
I think Dr. Yang just added this too, but and Seattle. I mean, right there in Seattle. One of the things that's really that's a great question, because I don't think, especially with the brand new stadiums in somewhere like SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, and I mean even I don't even know what the Seattle football stadium's called anymore. It's changed names so many times, but that is still a relatively new and very modern stadium. I've actually been thinking about what is going to be, how the homeless crisis on the West Coast is going to be dealt with for 2026. There's a fantastic book to read if you're interested in this, because I think there is a way to do this. I mean, like I said, there is a just partaking in it, just watching it is in fact a political act, but you can also help educate people, right? I mean, like, what is being done with homeless people in this situation? How can you talk about the building and financing of stadiums and things like that? Great book to read by a writer, journalist, sports journalist named Dave Zirin, and it's called Brazil's Dance with the Devil. And it's literally about how Brazil prepared for I think they did the World Cup and the Olympics in the same calendar year. And it is moving people, displacing entire communities out of cities with the favelas. It is a book that it'll kind of blow your mind. And one of the things where I'm saying yes, we are involved in this, doing it is political. We are going to do it. I'm going to be there. I can't wait to watch. But one of the things is when I'm sitting and talking with my friends during a game or, before or after a game, can we talk about the political and the economic ramifications of what is going on? Can we help educate people about the realities of this? I still can't believe that the World Cup is going to be in Qatar. I mean, I'm still shocked about this. When I saw Sepp Blatter saying that they never should have been, awarded that, I was like, pardon my language, no shit, right? I mean, but everyone knew that years ago. I'm thinking of this in terms of also Saudi Arabia. It was one of the first countries, number 4 or 5 to after the last World Cup. I think it was the third country after the most recent World Cup, to introduce a women's professional football league. Saudi Arabia. Okay, now we can talk about Saudi Arabia doing things to look like they're a modern country and things. Saudi Arabia is horrible when it comes to women's rights. This is something where it's just like countries can do things and they can try to look, progressive or like they're on the right track. But ultimately, what is actually going on here? Are we trying to look like we're a modern nation, or actually are we a modern nation? And this was something where Brazil, I mean, it hurt what they did to their own people, the amount of money that was spent. They set their own country back. We even see that with countries putting forth the Olympics. I mean, Greece put itself into a massive financial hole. So I think that there's a way we can do it. We can still enjoy this, but educate yourself. Read that book. Talk to your friends about it. What are we all thinking about aside from the soccer? Is it something that we can football? Sorry, Dr. Yang. Is it something we can actually talk about and learn things and broaden our minds about it? And I think for me, that's the way to do it. I mean, that's the only way that I can live with myself and still just be a super fan, which I will always be.
Thank you so much for that. And the fact that Sepp Blatter, was levying his critiques immediately when I saw that headline, I was like, if that's ever a pot kettle situation, I don't know what is, because he hasn't exactly been the gold standard, if you will, of corporate integrity. We'll just say that.
Yes, he was very much involved in millions of dollars exchanging hands, involving himself and later head of FIFA, Platini. And of course, Sarkozy was very much part of the equation in granting Qatar the hosting of this.
Sure, absolutely. And Dr. Yanity, I do have a follow-up question for you. And that is, we have a question from the Q&A, which asks, I think, a very important and provocative one, which is, how can we, the fans, push for more equality and benefits for underfunded teams, and especially women's teams from FIFA and other nations, without being Bob Marley's daughter, right? So
Yeah.
for the multitudes of us who don't have that type of very famous cachet, right? That
Or a
we
cachet
can
of cash,
use.
as the case may
Right,
be.
right. Yeah. What can we do? Any informed suggestions that you have?
One of the things that I think we can do is that we can FIFA is going to give a lot of lip service to its promotion of the women's game. And I say lip service because it doesn't feel like it is still it's not a priority for FIFA, and that is just a fact. The women's game is not a priority for FIFA. Some of the things that that I think are important to do is to hold FIFA's feet to the fire just a little bit. And that's so much easier said than done. When I want to watch the World Cup, I want to watch. For me, I found a way to watch the Women's Africa's Cup of Nations, and that was challenging. Watching the Women's Euro Championships. We speak with the only currency that your everyday fan will have is that I'm going to support a company that supports women's sport. Looking around to see, I was trying to find the list of the corporate sponsors for the Nigerian team, and I started way too late. I was doing that today, to be very honest with you. But who are the corporate sponsors? There are a couple, and I've seen them on their jerseys. I want to find that, and I want to somehow let them know, whether it's on social media or whatever it is, that their support matters. Yes, you're just one person, but I think that it really does have some currency to say that I'm all in with the New Zealand women's team, and this player, it's just things like that where you can show that support and finding a way to watch. And it's some, you're looking at crazy channels in the middle of the night, but we have the power to stream those channels now. Sometimes it costs 25 extra bucks, but that is something we can do. And until I say until, but I'm not sure that FIFA is ever going to treat female athletes in the women's game equally. But I do think that it is critical to when you're in the public spaces, to talk about it, to raise the level of conversation around women's sports, particularly obviously football in this situation. When when talking about, well, we're going to be watching the men's World Cup, which I say that all the time. I'm the person that says the men's World Cup. I want FIFA to know that it matters to me, and I do silly things like I'll tweet about it. And the companies that I see sponsor both the U.S. women's and men's national team, that makes a difference to me. And if I have a choice, I will buy something along those lines, because that's really the only currency we have as fans, to be very honest. So that is what I recommend we do. And I didn't win that $1 billion either in California this week, but we're not going to be that beneficiary to a team, but supporting those teams. When they come to the United States, go see them, go see them. They do travel. There are friendlies in the United States. There's this weekend, the U.S. women's national team just plays down the road, but they're playing Germany. But go see the team when Colombia comes. Try to go see them. Watch them on TV. It makes a difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Yang, did you want to add something?
I think you very wisely pointed to ways in which you can pressure and support teams and people that are not as well funded. But the other part of being involved in any of these international events celebrates and highlights women's sports that can pressure the states to be more supportive of their teams. It's not going to be tomorrow when many of these countries might introduce the equivalent of Title IX, which was, of course, such a huge boon to women's sports. But participating in international sporting events might enable many of these states to step up and be more supportive of their women's teams in all kinds of sports.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And in looking at the time, I see we are coming to a close, but for the very last question, and I'll pose it first to Dr. Yang and then to Dr. Yanity, we could not have a panel on football and the World Cup without asking each of our esteemed panelists what teams they will be rooting for when the World Cup kicks off on November the 20th. So I will first pose the question to Dr. Yang. What team or teams will you be rooting for and why? And then Dr. Yanity, I will pose the same questions to you.
I'm sort of not your typical sports fan in that I don't have a hometown favorite or a favorite that I stick to through thick and thin. Of course, I'll be rooting for the US, but I also root for many of the South American teams. But generally, I favor underdog teams. So whatever teams don't have much of a chance, which means teams from Africa, North Africa, and generally the Asian teams, I'm more likely to root for them. But I'm always behind the US team too, although I know they don't have any chance of winning the World Cup, the men's World Cup.
This is I've caught it from some of my friends about this, but my wife spent some time in Ghana, and so I have become a Ghanaian football fan. Now and I have honestly because when I went and visited her, there were games that were being played. She went to an under 17 women's game. She said because she was one of the only people in the crowd, but it was really cool to see. But I was just so struck by the passion of the fans, even in places where there wasn't a whole lot of electricity, to see how they were finding out about the results and the kids were talking about it. So I have a soft spot in my heart for Ghana, but like Dr. Yang, I still have my American exceptionalism flag in there. The reason, honestly, it's been over the years, I've kind of just been poo-poo on the U.S. men's national team because they haven't, had the backs of their female counterparts, but of late they have, and because of that, they have my support.
Awesome. Thank you. And yes, I too will be rooting for the US, but like Dr. Yang, I do root for the underdog as well. And so certainly the African countries, right? So Cameroon, Senegal, Ghana, Egypt, and Morocco, I will root for them. And funny story about the Ghanaian men's football team. One of my favorite soccer calls of all time was back in 2014. Ghana was playing Germany in group play, and they had scored 2 goals, I think, in maybe 5 minutes. And after the second goal, Ghana did like a collective team dance on the pitch. And the announcer for ESPN said, Ghana is strutting their stuff and they're dancing in the streets of Accra. And I was like, yes, Accra has made it onto the American airwaves. So, well, thank you so much, both of you, Drs. Yang and Dr. Yanity. This was, I think, an awesome discussion. And this discussion was recorded. And yes, please do keep in touch. And again, many thanks to the history department for hosting it, particularly Josh for all the email correspondence and tech setup. Josh, we really appreciate you. And we hope that you all have a great rest of your day. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.